One of the best ways to learn how to think like a leader is to read about and study biblical leaders. Sometimes we look at poor leaders and learn what not to do and how not to think. But today we want to look at one of the greatest leaders, not only in the history of Scripture and in the Bible narrative, but really one of the greatest leaders who ever lived. It's Moses. And sometimes we think of Moses as this such a great leader that leading like he led is out of our reach. But I wanted to look at three aspects of Moses' leadership, three things he did as a leader, three leadership foundational principles, three leadership best practices, three ways that great leaders think in the life of Moses. And I think we'll see that it's not so far out of reach that really any one of us can do what we see Moses doing. So here we go. I want to read in Exodus chapter 17, very familiar story to most of us, beginning in verse 8 through verse 13. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, "Choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hands, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side, the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun, and Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. Now, that's the story. Here are three leadership principles that I think any one of us can do that demonstrate why Moses was such a great leader. Of course, there are hundreds of things Moses did, but in this story, here we go. First of all, it's the idea of team versus solo. Moses led a team. Moses gathered a team. Moses built a team. He refused to lead solo. He built his team. He led his team. And you see that he's clearly leading the team. He's the one telling Joshua to choose the people for the team. He's the one who's standing there with Aaron and Hur. He recruited a team, he built a team, he led the team. So it is team versus solo. Every one of us can lead that way. But sometimes we choose to lead as individual, independent solo leaders. Not a smart move. If you want to think like a leader, think team, not solo. Secondly, Moses empowered versus micromanaged. And right here in verse 8, he looks at Joshua and says, "Choose for us." You make the choice. This was a younger, inexperienced, next generation leader who was empowered. So if you want to lead like Moses, if you want to think like a leader, you think empowerment, not micromanagement. And so he empowers Joshua to recruit and appoint and put in men. He didn't say, "Give me a master list and I will go through and make the final decisions." There was an empowering. It reminds me of Acts 7, when the apostles looked at these people and they said, "Look, you pick some men that will take care of this serving of the tables. We will give ourselves to the ministry of the word and prayer." Great leaders empower others rather than micromanaging and holding all of the authority. So if you want to be a great leader, how well do you empower and give real authority and decision-making to other leaders on your team, especially next generation leaders? And then thirdly, if you want to think like a leader, act like a leader, lead like a leader, learn from Moses this idea of credit versus blame. This is pretty amazing to me, how we see this final verse. So you've got Moses, Aaron, and Hur up on the hill, and they're really in a place of prayer and spiritual warfare and leadership. And then we have Joshua, but it's not Joshua alone, because he's already been told in verse 8 to choose some other men to go and fight Amalek. But at the end of this, the way this is summarized, it says, "And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword." Now, who wrote Exodus? Think about that a minute. Who wrote this? Exodus was written by Moses. And what Moses did is he gave the credit to Joshua. He gives credit to the next generation, to the leader who was out there on the front lines. He didn't take the credit for himself. Great leaders give credit and take responsibility. They give credit to others. They take the blame themselves. If something went wrong, great leaders say it's the leader's issue and problem, and we own it. If something goes right, then we give the credit to others. As a leader, do you give blame and take credit? Or do you give credit and take blame and take responsibility? When things go great, give the credit to someone else. When things don't go great, own it yourself as the leader. That's what Moses did. So, lessons, leadership principles that any leader, no matter what we lead, can do in the way Moses did. Every one of us can build a team instead of leading solo. Every one of us can empower rather than micromanage. Every one of us can give honor and credit and brag on other parts of the team rather than taking the credit to ourselves. Every one of us can do that. So you want to think like a leader? Think like Moses in Exodus chapter 17.